Maybe we open the floor first, and then we might also come back later for the panelists. But yes, please, if you have any comments or questions to the panelists, not only to Ivan but also the others, please do. Thank you. Okay, so could you pass the mic to the person? Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Zia Madani from Kobe University PCRC. Thank you for this super interesting presentation and discussions. I'm very excited about it. This was particularly interesting for me because you did a comparison between the two governance regimes in the polls, which is of particular interest to me. I have a question with regards to some of the issues that you touched upon, Ivan, in your presentation, and of course it was also already reflected in this very recent report that you were the part of the authors, and which is the disruption of the Arctic exceptionalism. There is an observation in there to me is very important, and you touched upon in your remarks today as well. It's a very short observation. I just read it. Retreating sea ice has led to more economic interest in the Arctic, and it's increasing geopolitical importance, fueling militarization and tensions among Arctic states and external global powers like China. With that, do you think that this description in this observation is something that will await the Antarctic in the years to come? And that is for two reasons. One is that, well, obviously the permafrost thaw and the sea ice thaw is happening faster in the Arctic. That means this whole economic interests will be farther expected in the Antarctic than in the Arctic. And the second reason is that, well, historically the developments in the global arena happening elsewhere are showing impacts faster in the Arctic than in the Antarctic. So with that, do you think if that is the case, that same thing is awaiting in the Antarctic, do you think there is a lesson from the Arctic up until this moment or in the foreseeable future that can be utilized within the Antarctic Treaty System and in the policies that are yet to be taken within the Antarctic Treaty System? Thank you.
Would you like to take on that?
Well, Zia, thank you very much. That is a very hard question or set of questions to answer. So let me take it from one positive aspect, which is the limits on militarization under the Antarctic Treaty are extremely effective, and as far as we know, are continuing in a very positive way. Right? You don't see and hear reports of violations of the Antarctic Treaty. There are always concerns about whether there might be in the future, but there is perhaps less of an interest in militarization in Antarctica, which is a good thing, but you have a strong treaty system, and perhaps less of an interest. I mean, why would the great powers wish to have a current militarization of Antarctica with all of the costs? What would the benefits be? I mean, there are these questions about whether in the future are there economic implications for mineral activity, something like that, that has to be thought about. And there are interests of any number of countries, including non-great powers, as those are understood, that have regional political interests that could lead to some sort of conflict or difficulty. But that having been said, I think that there is a strong commitment to non-militarization, and as you understand, militaries can operate, but just for logistics purposes. You get then quickly into the question of dual-use issues, right? So there are a lot of questions about, well, if there are satellite downlink facilities and those are being improved, what does that mean and what are the implications of that? But I think in that context, it's important to be even-handed about the analysis, because even though you see reports in the papers often about China and sometimes Russia about doing this, many other countries, including the US, Germany, Turkey, Australia, et cetera, have various capabilities which could be described as dual use. So, partly it's a legal issue, partly it's a practical question of, is Antarctica being used for some sort of purpose, either for military application within Antarctica, within the region, or globally as it relates to satellites, all of that kind of thing. So those things bear watching. In terms of, there are satellite issues that are in the Arctic as well as in the Antarctic, in terms of capability and connections with polar orbiting satellites and all of that sort of thing. And those are the sort of issues that, national security agencies spend some time thinking about, and it has to be monitored.
All right, thank you. Any other comments, questions from the floor? All right, thank you, Renat. So he is also from the University of Akureyri and director for the international division. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation, Evan. And my name is Rúnar Gunnarsson from the University of Akureyri. You mentioned briefly what will happen when the chairmanship will be passed on to Russia, to Norway from Russia, which is about to happen soon, I guess, now in springtime. It'd be interesting to get some comments on that, how that will proceed, and also the procedures of the Secretariat and the workshops, the working groups within the Arctic Council, the fact that it has had on the working groups, and the possibility to continue the collaboration without Russia's involvement, or how do you foresee that? That's my question. And, can science then be the diplomacy in collaboration and continue without the political issues at hand? Thank you.
So Norway and the other Arctic states, other than Russia in particular, have very difficult work to do right now in order to manage transition. On the positive side, it hasn't all fallen apart, and there seems to be some communication between the Norwegians and Russians that is looking at how to preserve the Arctic Council as an institution. Because if there wasn't a will within the 8 states to have that preservation, the whole institution could collapse. And it's very hard. Institution building is extremely difficult, not just in the Arctic, but everywhere. So the commitment, and this is also reflected within the U.S. policy, and I think that the NSAR that I mentioned before, which I think is quite deliberate. So there is this question of great moment right now about how you handle that, and how you make sure that the rules of procedure, even though it's not of an international organization, clearly provide that the Arctic Council is made up of 8 states, all of which conduct the decision-making, and the decision-making is taken by consensus. So if Russia objects and says no, then that creates a very difficult situation. And the positive part is that it appears that some discussions are going on and this is being balanced. But then what would that mean for the Russians? Will the Russians be content to just allow the things to continue? I think it's quite unlikely that there would be political contacts that would be revived in the current search. You're not going to have ministerial meetings. You're not probably going to have senior Arctic officials meeting, with a Russian senior Arctic official, that sort of thing. Probably not going to have meetings in Russia. But how, for projects that do involve Russia, how then can working groups work? How can they take decisions? I don't know what the answer to that question is. But, is there some balance that can be found diplomatically? And also the question of the 7, other than Russia, may have different views about all of this. And all of it has to be balanced. But I think in the back of many countries' minds is the Russian behavior in Ukraine is so horrendous and so unacceptable that you can't bring them back into any sort of normal Arctic cooperation right now. So hopefully there's enough wisdom to figure out how to thread that needle. But I want to get Timo in on this because he'll have great ideas.
Yeah, just say a few words. I mean, we are discussing about this, and we don't know. I don't know any more. But I guess that I think that it's important to see the kind of signaling from the 7 Western Arctic states that they have been kind of very clearly saying all the time the Arctic Council is important, and that we now have the chairmanship transition discussions between Russia and Norway, so that's happening. And we know that, for instance, a couple of weeks ago there was a seminar where a Danish senior Arctic official was very open about saying that yes, we will be able to continue the Arctic Council. Don't doubt about that even. So I was like, wow, that's a very confident talk. But so they obviously, like, if all the 8 really want this, they will find a way. So it doesn't have to be even in the rules of procedure. They will find a way to continue. And the question is whether they have that. And I think that what Evan said exactly, that it's very much to do with Russia, because also we would need to probably have a very long time when Russia has to be a kind of silent partner, and whether Russia will, for that longer period of time, this is what I'm thinking, that it's going to continue. The war will continue for quite some time. So will Russia see kind of rational for I think that we can get through the transition, but then when this becomes a longer thing, then I think that there may be problems there. Just to say that also many are celebrating the fact that Norway's the actual kind of incoming chair, simply because Norway has been in this situation for a very long time as a NATO member and collaborating with Russia. So obviously it's very well positioned to be the one, who is now taking the chairmanship, and the next one is Denmark. So also having a similar type of position, not Finland, for instance. As in Finland, there's a war mentality. I would say that it's very difficult, these issues. So just to this kind of, we don't know basically.
Yeah. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. With regard to how scientific work would be able to continue. This is actually a good introduction into my talk on was it Monday next week, where I talk about science diplomacy and how we can work that. And I have great hopes that the Arctic Council will be able to work in the working groups and even on a even more direct project level. And I think in many ways we need to have that dialogue, including all members of the Arctic Council. And one of the projects that was high level during the Icelandic chairmanship and had a promise to continue before the invasion in Ukraine was on gender issues in the Arctic. And that's, to me, an example of a continued dialogue that we want to have with Russia, because we know the importance and the very much complex intercultural dialogue with Russia on gender issues. So when we continue our work within Arctic Council, the Arctic states, I think we should emphasize these type of projects where we can continue discussing the value, the culture, the findings of social science research within our states, because in the end this is about the populations that live in the Arctic, and as mentioned earlier, the continued interest and the increased interest in the economic benefits from the region. And that really answers the question with regard to the Antarctic, is that there will, in the foreseeable future, not be enough economic interests in the Antarctic in order to kind of push the same type of militarization that we'll be seeing in the Arctic. And just think about it, that we could actually, in the next 20 years, and that's when I was asking about the division of lines, we could see two Arctics. We could see the cooperation between the seven, where we have international treaties on protecting the environment and building up infrastructure for indigenous peoples to be able to improve their livelihoods. And on the other side, we could see extreme resource extractions and pollution that would simply flow over in the complex ecosystems that are there. So that's not that's not what we want to see. Therefore, we will have to continue the dialogue no matter how difficult the situation is in the world.
All right, thank you. So we have another question from the floor. Thank you, Stella.
Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Stella Ebersmeyer. I'm a visiting PhD researcher here. And my question kind of continues along the same lines of Russian cooperation. So you mentioned that cooperation with Russia is still going on in some areas. So when it comes, for example, you mentioned fisheries. But of course, in other areas, it has been quite stagnant. So I was wondering, are there any lessons that we can learn from the processes in the areas where cooperation with Russia is going on to enhance cooperation in other areas of Arctic governance?
So I'm sure there are. I think the reasons that they are limited tend to do with the nature of the subject matter. So for fisheries, you have to have at the table those countries that are either ones that are capable of doing the fishing or represent the markets where the fish go. Otherwise, the regime doesn't function. When it comes to the work of coast guards, for example, there is a tradition of trying to get away from politics when it comes to search and rescue and these sort of issues. When it comes to cooperation within International Maritime Organization and some other places, there's a mutual interest in, and I think that's the key. I mean, there is a kind of mutual interest. But there is also a very strong interest, including a political interest, in not signaling to the Russians that, well, it's okay to just continue. Because in most of these respects, the Russians would say, look, there's nothing going on here. We're having a special operation with Ukraine. You can cooperate with us. We'll show up at meetings. You can come to St. Petersburg, whatever it is. But that's not the political reality of the current situation. So there is this still, the question is often asked, is it possible for some sort of unofficial dealings for people to work person to person with their friends, Russian institutions? My impression in talking with scientists is it's not very easy to do that. First of all, there's a question of whether it puts some of those people in Russia at risk if they work with foreigners. But there's also the question of institutional involvement. Who is funding? Are you in effect working with the Russian government as you do this kind of work, especially if it's more than a quick chat and an email or something, if it's more direct than that. So there may be some other areas, but I think that cooperation, including research cooperation in the Arctic, is in great trouble until the Ukraine conflict is resolved one way or the other.
And Timo has his view. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say very much what Evan already said. I think that, so we did this study to our government about what is going on and what is not. And obviously one could kind of, so the line agencies that are still cooperating with Russia, the bilateral cooperation, whether it's search and rescue, fisheries cooperation, whether it's, for instance, the border water management, and they pretty much kind of see that they are, perhaps the lessons, if there are any, is very, very, very much so that that let's just do the minimal, so we can continue this cooperation. Let's do it online. Let's change the data, and perhaps then we can kind of think that we can perhaps get a lesson from that what could be possible to do in the Arctic Council. So that's where we come to this kind of working group level or project level, that may be the way that the Arctic Council cooperation can move forward, but it has to be done in a very politically savvy way, because it's like if any journalist in Finland finds out that Finland is collaborating with Russia in the Arctic Council in any kind of political level, then that's going to be a major issue in Finland. So that's really that bilateral cooperation. It's really under the radar. No one really knows about it, but Arctic Council is really out there, and that's really makes things difficult.
All right, and EU also has some comments. Thank you.
Just a very short comment on this one. Ivan mentioned that individual academics might even be at risk on the other side if they would participate as Russians in projects with us in the West. And I think this is really what this comes down to, is that we have to remember that we are dealing with a regime, and the regime is not something that we want to work with in our scientific projects. When we are working and we say we want to work with Russians, we are talking about the scientific community. And again, I remind you on my lecture on Monday of the importance of scientific diplomacy, that we should be able to have a level of communication based on academic values and academic dialogue and discussions. Always remembering that that does not in any way condone the actions of the Russian regime. So how can we kind of change the dialogue, reminding us there's a regime that is doing these atrocities, versus there must be a future where we live together.
All right, good. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have another one. Thank you very much. Could you pass on the mic? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing experts' views and deep insights. My name is Noguchi. I come from a Japanese NGO, Friends of the Earth Japan, which is a Japanese member of Antarctica and Southern Ocean Coalition, ASOC. If I may, I would like to hear Mr. Bloom's insight and expectation about further creation of Antarctic MPAs and possible role Japan may play for that, for further creation of Antarctic MPAs. And honestly, this evening I was very impressed by Mr. Bloom's affection toward Japan. And wouldn't you see Japan being more active toward for further creation of Antarctic MPAs, toward establishment of a network of Antarctic MPAs? To me, Japan has been like a bystander, not very active. But if you see Japan if you see Japan's potential to be more active, to become a more active player, like a mediator between China, Russia, and the rest of Commonwealth states, please, I would like to hear your views, expectations. Thank you.
Think how to answer that. The thing about Japan is that in CAMLR in particular, the lead agency is the Fisheries Agency, and their main concern tends to be fisheries management, and perhaps less in terms of marine protected areas. Japan has ultimately supported their three main proposals, as you know, for marine protected areas, and I think Japan is formally indicated that it is supportive of at least two of them. I'm not quite sure about the Antarctic Peninsula one from Argentina and Chile, but you'd have a better sense of that. So I think that there is more that Japan can do in terms of promoting a sort of international enthusiasm for this issue, because I think that ultimately they will go along with the MPAs, but as to whether they are, along with other countries, really demanding them, I'm not as sure. So if they were to become more active, I think there is this chance that at least there could be some influence with China, which shares some of the same sort of fisheries issues and concerns from a regulatory point of view. I don't know what that can influence Russia at this time. So, as you know, there's going to be in June a special intersessional meeting of the Commission, and I think that does give Japan an opportunity to play a key role. But I think it will take a kind of interagency focus to do that.
All right. We had the Antarctic Open Symposium in December, And Mr. Morishita, who is the head of the delegation for the Kamura, did speak on that issue, and he was very subtle where Japan stands on this MPA situation, but he used a very subtle terms to describe the Japanese position on the current MPA issues, and that's also on the website, so it's open for you to observe. And I think Ivan has touched upon a very important issue of interagency discussions internally, and that might be another issue for Japan for the Arctic Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, since it is now headed almost all by the fisheries agency people, and not having, for example, scientists, the pure ecosystem scientists in the delegation. So more of the internal issues, I think, for Japan to consider, especially when it comes to fisheries management issues. Thank you. All right, so any other, of course, there is another one. Of course, many of you will come to the reception, and of course we can discuss it, but of course we'll take it from you, a PhD student from Kyoto University. Thank you. Could you identify yourself? And thank you.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation as well as the intriguing comments. My name is Zhong Li, and I'm a PhD student of Graduate School of Law at Kyoto University. So my research area is about international law of the sea as well as international shipping law. So my first question is somewhat related to the UNCLOS Article 234, which deals with the, it deals with the polar region. It gives the wide discretion to the coastal states to preserve the marine environment, but it was coupled with strict conditions. I was thinking that given the current situation, the melting sea ice and the change of the environmental ecological conditions in the polar region, so have any states that are actually implementing Article 234 in its national as a national legislation, and whether the changing condition has made them to rethink the national policies on in this respect. And my second question is that it's more related to international shipping in the navigation in the Arctic region. Is that if it can be proved that navigation in the Arctic is commercially feasible, which could cause impacts to alter the current patterns of international shipping. So could this change the position of the non-members of Arctic Council? I mean, the observing states like Japan or maybe China? And is there going to be a share of power, or is it going to be the change of powers, for example, between the Arctic Council and international organizations like the IMO? So these are the questions I wanted to ask. Thank you very much.
You can probably take the Arctic one. It's hard. In terms of those are hard questions. I think normally when the question comes to Article 234, one gets into some questions about Canadian actions and its regulations. The U.S. government has traditionally had some differences of view with our Canadian brothers about some of these issues, how they implement their Nordregs. It also has some relation to the straight baselines that they draw, which the U.S. doesn't agree with, and the status of the Northwest Passage. So if the narrow question is, do the change in sea ice conditions and climate change cause some rethinking? I haven't seen that. Maybe that will come, but I have not. There tends to be a kind of agreement to disagree, a willingness to compromise between countries that work together very closely. So the legal principles remain for either side, but if you need to break ice or to have your navies cooperate in some sort of way, you figure out a way of doing it without sort of getting into the weeds of how one interprets 234, because that doesn't lead you anywhere. On the question of navigation in the Arctic and the relation to Arctic Council and IMO, I guess I would say that the Arctic Council is not really a regulatory body, so that it's not, from my point of view, the non-Arctic states have full and equal rights when it comes to law of the sea. So you should not have a situation where there is some notion that the governance of the Arctic is for the Arctic states and is exclusionary. When I hear that sort of thing, I don't really understand what they're talking about. But when it comes to the activities of the Arctic Council, which again are non-regulatory, then the decision makers are the 8 Arctic states, and sometimes in the context of working with indigenous peoples and traditional knowledge and those sort of aspects as well. So I don't see that there has to be a collision between the Arctic Council and law of the sea or anything like that.
And Timo, as professors,
yeah, just briefly, I think this is a very, very difficult question. Of course, the Article 234, and I guess that this is especially for Canada. I think it's with the kind of enclosure of the archipelago under their historic internal waters, which is a controversial legal argument. Still, I would say, of course, like my Canadian colleagues never like me saying this, but I do think that it's a controversial legal argument there. And at least Canada and Russia have made use of this. The Russian situation is and I haven't really followed it very clearly, but I think that the Northern Sea Route, that's not the whole northeastern sea route. I think that there are some problems in terms of its legality. The most recent legislations and even to the extent of the exclusive economic zone, and I think that it is created with this constructive ambiguity of also the Article 234, and I think that it's also important to note that it was negotiated for the Arctic rather than the Antarctic, so that's the context. And yeah, like Levan said, that I think it's really clear that the Arctic Council had some role. So there was an Arctic marine shipping assessment, kind of recommending the negotiation for IMO Polar Code legally binding, but obviously the Arctic Council has had some role, like the best practices forum that it has now, but obviously it's IMO. IMO is the main game in town, and as Evan said, that it's this kind of facilitator, some kind of ideational role, a brainstorming role that has been important, that the Arctic Council has been able to kind of assist the main processes in motion.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your active participation, and thank you again, Mr. Ivan Bloom, for your keynote speech, and Eyo, Timo, for your excellent comments and engagement, and thank you very much to you for a very active seminar that you have made for us. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ivan. Thank you.